So now that we've covered some of the basic building blocks to understand value-based pricing based on economic value, let's formally define what value-based pricing is. So value-based pricing, in a nutshell, is pricing based on the value that your product provides to your customers. And again, value here refers to economic value. So value-based pricing is the method of setting a price by which a company calculates and tries to earn the differentiated worth of its product for a particular customer segment when compared to its competitor. So again, the prior slide shows you the exact formula to calculate value-based pricing, but in words, from a conceptual definitional perspective, you're trying to calculate the differentiated worth of my product compared to the next best alternative offering and quantify that, put a dollar, whatever the local currency is. So that would be your differentiated worth in monetary terms. And you would add that to the price of your next best alternative offering, which should give you the value-based price of your product. Let's take an example of, let's use some examples to understand this a little bit more, which should give us a better understanding of some different types of value. So we have what's called true economic value. Another word for true economic value is objective value. Now, what is true economic value or objective value? So this is the value that the firm believes in. So this is the value that the company believes its product is able to provide to its customers. So again, this is from the seller's perspective, the company's perspective. Okay, so true economic value, another word for true economic value based on what we've learned is value in use price. It's the maximum price, it's the theoretically maximum price that a company can charge to its customers based on how much value that they believe their product provides to their customers. So let's take the example of a toy maker who is and we have an air filtration system. So we have this table here where we have an existing air filtration system where the operating cost per hour is 10, and the new air filtration system that they're trying to sell to a toy maker is $15. The probability of the system crash is 20% over 1 year for the existing product in the current market. Whereas for the new air filtration system, it's only 1% over 1 year. The cost, if the system crashes, is $100,000 for both the existing product and the new product. The hours of operation are identical at 2,500 hours per year. And the price for the existing product is $75,000. And we're trying to calculate the price of the new product. In other words, we're trying to calculate the true economic value or the value in use price of this product. So if you look at that equation, TEV, true economic value, is the price of the reference, the existing product, plus the system crash savings minus the added operating costs. So as you can see, the difference between the system crash savings and the added operating costs is nothing more than the difference in value. So if you look at that equation, that looks very similar to what you have seen in the previous slide, which is the value in use price equation, right? Because VIU price was defined as the price of the next best alternative offering plus the value differential, which is equivalent to TEV, true economic value, which is the price of the reference plus the difference in system crash savings and added operating costs. So if you do all the, the math is very simple. I'm not going to go over the math. If you do, just plug in the numbers based on the numbers that you see in the table there. The true economic value comes out to $81,500. So again, this is the maximum price that the company thinks that it can charge to its customers based on the value, the objective value, the value that they think that their product deserves, which may not coincide with the value that customers perceive. Which brings us to the notion of perceived value. So perceived value, as the name implies, is the value that is perceived, is the value that is recognized by customers. So typically, perceived value will not be the same as true economic value because, again, true economic value is from the company's perspective. It's the value that they believe that their product is able to provide, whereas perceived value is from the customer's perspective. And because customers, for various reasons, will not believe everything that a company says, they may be skeptical, or they may be irrational, or they just may be ignorant. Therefore, typically, perceived value is always lower than true economic value. So if you look at this table here, everything is the same as the previous table. The only difference here is the probability of the system crash. In the previous slide, it was 1% for the new product, for the new air filtration system. Whereas here, because now we're talking about perceived value, it is 5%. In other words, customers do not believe that it's going to be 1%. They may think that that's too low. I mean, it can't be that good. So, they believe that it's going to be higher. So if we assume that it's 5%, and again, if you just do the math, then the perceived value comes out to be $77,500, which is lower than the previous true economic value, which I believe it was $81,500. So if we were to put this on a graph here, where we have a vertical line here, the true economic value would be at the very top. That would be $81,500. Again, true economic value is equivalent to objective value. And then right below that would be perceived value, which is from the customer's perspective, which we just calculated to be $77,500. And if we assume the cost of goods sold is $50,000, then the perceived value that's been created is 77,000 minus 50,000, which is, I guess, 27,500. So typically, the price that a firm will charge to its customers will lie somewhere in between that 77,500, which is the perceived value, and 50,000, which is cost of goods sold. Because if the company charges something above the perceived value, then that provides no incentive for customers to pay, because the price is higher than what the customers perceive the product to be. Whereas the company will want to charge higher than 50,000 because they at least have to cover, they have to make up for the cost of goods sold. So typically it's going to be somewhere in between the price charged to a customer, the actual price will be somewhere in between the perceived value and the cost of goods sold. Now, let's extend the example of this air filtration system, but now let's say that instead of the buyer being a toy maker, let's say that it's an oil shore rig company that's digging oil in the ocean. So again, because the product will be used differently for different occasions, the probability of a system crash changes. The cost of a system crash obviously is going to be a lot higher for a bigger, business such as digging oil, as opposed to a toy maker. And the operating costs also change. So let's assume that if some of these numbers change in the table because the buyer is inherently different, they're using the product, although it's the same product for different usage occasions, then we can calculate, again, the perceived value of this product to be $133,500. Oh, actually, that would be the true economic value. So the true economic value would be $133,500. Now, if we calculate the perceived value, then again, pending some of these numbers in the tables change, the perceived value will be $105,500. So again, it'll be lower than the true economic value. So if we compare side by side this air filtration system that's used by the toy maker versus by this oil company that's digging oil, then we can see that the perceived value and the true economic value for the toy maker is significantly different from the true economic value and the perceived value for the oil rig company. So what this is suggesting is that if for the same product, the seller charges, let's say, $77,500, because it's the same product to these two different buyers, then we may have a problem here, because the $77,500 is really, it's the maximum price. It's not going to provide that much incentive for the toy maker to buy this air filtration system, because it's charging basically right at the perceived value. Whereas it may be leaving quite a bit of money on the table for this oil rig company, because you're only charging $77,500 when the perceived value of that air filtration system for the oil rig company is $105,500. So you still have some room to work with there. So the point here is that for value-based pricing, depending on the customer, the segment, you may want to consider charging a different price, despite the fact that it may be the same product. Why? Because as the name implies, the economic value that a product provides to customers may not be identical if customers are in different segments or are in different industries, because they may use the product in different ways or for different usage occasions, which may bring about different amounts of value to different customers. So a smart seller, if they know how their product is able to provide different amounts of value to different customers, then they should be able to charge different prices accordingly.